Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Payrollo.
And I'm Eugene Robinson.
And we are at episode 75, and we are calling this one the Not Normal Show.
Which it most certainly is, given my present locale.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. For those of you that are listening, Eugene is in a different place. You want to tell us where you are and why?
I am in Boise, Idaho, a famous potato land. And I'm here on the occasion of being in the midst of a tour with Buñuel, the wonderful international supergroup that I'm in that's still touring on a record we released last year called Mansitude. So we have a band name that's hard for people to pronounce and a record name that's hard for people to pronounce. And I only know this because I've been talking to journalists and they keep Mansitude, a Buñuel. Oh, I thought this was all easy to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen them, I guess.
Yeah. And you played a night in Boise, right?
Really? 14 shows, 14 days, 14 shows. So yes, tonight. Yeah.
Wow. Craziness. So that's not normal. And the reason that we thought about this is that there's so many things that are happening in the world that are not normal to either people's, in the political situation, in people's individual lives. And I thought it would be good for us to just talk about, what do you do when things are not normal? How do you handle circumstances when you are at work? And we can start with the political situation. How do you show up when, things are, to many of us perceiving it, crazy? How do you, what are your expectations of yourself and other people? And then what do you do if things are not normal for you personally? If you're going through some sort of a crisis or difficulty, how do you keep it together? Because the reality is, most of us have to go to work to get a paycheck, to keep our health insurance. And sometimes when we have to go to work when it's not normal.
I'm smiling because I'm remembering an occasion when I had a boss who was concerned about my inner life. And he said, listen, I don't want you to run yourself into, burnout. If you feel you're getting burned out, come to me first so we can kind of, like a good doctor, come to me before you're injured. And I remember after doing a couple of 24-hour days, I felt like I was close to burnout. And I went to the boss and said, hey, remember that thing you told me about? He was like, yeah. So I think I'm getting kind of close to burnout. He was like, great. Yeah, if you could just get back to your desk. And I mean, it was like I had never said a single word. So, I remember there's a woman who was a war correspondent, and she said all the symptoms that people would have expected her to bring to bear in, war-torn Lebanon or wherever she was, Afghanistan, she felt when she went home. She felt this terrible kind of anxiety and depression and nervousness when she went back. She lived in New York City or someplace outside, maybe Jersey. But when she dropped into a war zone in the Balkans or something like that, she was completely relaxed. So I figure trauma, certain types of trauma predispose you to be comfortable with trauma. So if you are already, like William James talked about in the realities of religious experience, if you, an abnormal response to abnormal stimuli is completely normal. And I find that usually I fall into that category where if things are not normal, then for me, that's I'm level set at not normal. I get slightly bored with normal, and I can handle it less well than I can not normal.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I remember having a conversation with somebody who was in sales and was incredibly successful. These are big $1 million deals. And he and I were talking about salespeople and personalities. And I said, every good salesperson I've ever known has come from a profoundly dysfunctional home, because you have to be able to read the room and read people really, really quickly. And he just kind of got really quiet.
Yeah. Hit that one right on the head. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Well, and I think that also happens with, I've worked in advertising, in and around advertising for a lot of years. And a lot of times the people that get the most work done, I also have that sense, I know what kind of family you came from, because I came from the same family. And that's why we're both working 24 hours, in a row. Yep. But I think what I was thinking about in terms of this is that it's funny when you said that idea about your boss saying, just go back to work and work harder. My assumption is that any support that we are going to get in not normal times is going to be support that we give ourselves, right? Or we get from our
Yes.
friends, right? So I am just starting out with an assumption that corporate America is not going to help you, right? I mean, we said that once recently in a show. It was funny. I think the title of the social media post that we had on the clip was "No one is coming to save you." And it got the most views of anything we've ever done on social media.
There are very few. There's a guy who I know who had problems with alcohol. And when we worked together at Adobe, and they were very good with him. They gave him 8 months off at 80% salary, and he could go to rehab, and he could go to meetings, and he could take hot yoga. And when he came back, he got his job, and they were exceedingly cool about it. So that was one rare instance in which, he's probably the only one who I've seen, get the correct corporate response and actually manage to fix himself. So,
well, and I think what's happening now, at least, what I'm seeing, and I'm curious to get your perspective, because of course now you live in Spain and you are touring on the West Coast of the United States.
Yes.
What does it feel like to you coming back to the United States and being here for a little while after having been away in Spain?
I find what Spain has gifted me and granted me is a lowering of the temperature.
Sure.
Right. I mean, and I've had to, usually what always gets me is stuff on the freeway, actually. Like somebody will cut me off and I'll pick up on a negative energy. Next thing, we're both flipping each other off, driving 120 miles an hour. Right. And so I've gotten cut off a few times in Spain and also cut people off. And there's maybe a little tap on the horn. And I pull up next to them and I try to give them, the eyes of justice. Like, what do you? And they're just tuned into other things. They don't look back. They're not looking. They're not even aware of the agita that I'm feeling.
Right.
So I've kind of, in the 6 months I've been there, I've kind of adopted that as my operate. So I was curious to see, first thing, I'm picked up from the airport and I'm driving, right? Because we're being on tour is about getting from one place to another. And, people are cutting us off and I'm still. Yesterday, a guy pulled up next to us and gave us the finger, and that kind of got me. I roll the window down. I'm screaming. I go, I got to work on the Spain thing a bit. But generally, I'm much more relaxed, and not only relaxed, but I can feel that I'm temperamentally out of step with, the general level of anxiety that's surrounding me. Which it's noticeable to me, whether we're in a diner or I'm sitting here in Panera, and I can feel it. It's a different vibe.
Right.
So.
Well, I noticed that when I went to Mexico City to speak at a conference in the fall, and I was with some people from different countries, but the Americans, we kind of looked at each other like, it's just it feels so different because there's not that kind of omnipresent Trump voice, news, all of that isn't. We're not having to experience that, and I think. What is important, I think, to understand is, first of all, what is the impact this is having on you? Mm-hmm. And what is it that you need to do to care for yourself? Mm-hmm. Right. So you go ahead. What were you saying?
And I'm just kidding. And also, I mean, since the purview here is the workplace, I think there should also be maybe a secondary or tertiary understanding that your bosses don't give a shit. They absolutely, and to a certain point, I sort of agree. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to. Like if you are, what is that? The great line from that Public Enemy song, said, I can't do nothing for you is a song. And he says, your mother's got a gold nipple, can't help you. So this is Panera, but I'm relaxed about this. Right. The crying infant next to me.
That's not a problem that you can solve. The crying child in the Panera.
Yeah, correct.
Correct. They're experiencing that. But it's interesting because I've had a couple of people, friends and clients who are white women who have said to me some variation of listening to Trump talk about women to women, that we all know the examples, right? I don't need to list them again, is deeply activating because a lot of these women have had men say something similar to them, but they also express a diffidence. I shouldn't talk about it. I shouldn't acknowledge it because I am a white woman. I am not at risk of being whatever. And it's interesting because when I talk to them, and these are in one-on-one conversations, I'm like, mm-hmm. I am also a white woman. we can talk to each other about our experiences. That does not in any way diminish the experiences of other people. We are talking to one another. And the idea of recognizing, like, talking to another person, naming what's happening, being in connection or community is really important. And we shouldn't edit ourselves out. What do you think?
I think there was a great instance in which I was talking to a friend and they started talking about white people. And he started whispering, and I was like, "What are you whispering for?" We're in a public spot. We're talking about white folks. We can talk about white folks all we like. It's not. This is not prohibited speech. So in the part of marginal groups, maybe that's not the word I want to use, but you understand what I mean. Protected groups where the non-dominant paradigm, there's this kind of shyness connected to expressing it, like what's going to happen? The overseer is going to drag us someplace.
Well,
maybe, but I mean, in the workplace, these are reasonable concerns,
right?
And they leach into your personal life in the way that you're suggesting. So, should I? Can I? Should I? And these are not questions I often ask myself, but I understand people asking, like, what can I talk about? What, and difficult conversations from well-meaning people are always pleasant for me, even if I don't agree with them. I've got friends who are, MAGA types and 100% disagree with their politics, but we can do it agreeably, which seems to be in short supply in the U.S. Right. I mean, there's this, and I blame, I'm sorry to blame, I don't know that it deserves the blame, but I blame social media on this, where the automatic go-to is contention. I don't need to be at loggerheads because you favor Russia and the Russia-Ukrainian. I lost a friend over this. He said, I think your take on my take on Russia is disrespectful. And I go, I don't care. It ended the friendship.
Right.
So I think,
Well, and, a lot of it to me, I think recognizing that as individuals, different things work for us, right? Like, I mean, you talked about the person who was a war correspondent, right? Yeah. That work for her had a particular comfort, right? Yeah. And sometimes work has a particular comfort, right? Like sometimes I've certainly over the last few months had clients who have said it seems frivolous to be paying attention to this particular problem or skill set. But what I believe is that, especially if we enjoy our jobs or enjoy some of the people that we work with, or it gives us a sense of competence, that can be valuable, right? Like being able, for me, I mean, I tend to be a little bit of a workaholic, but I find work to be a very useful distraction. And I appreciate the fact that I know it's not rocket science, but, this past week, I facilitated a leadership team meeting for 2 days. And that's I really enjoy that, but it's incredibly demanding. It's very complex, right? And I was completely absorbed in it. When the first session was over, I slept like 9 hours and then got up and did it again. And it was nice for me to step out of the difficult reality and just focus on, this very sort of complex, advanced team coaching challenge in the way that some people really enjoy doing crossword puzzles or, whatever.
I was going to take issue with what you said as you were saying it. And then I realized when I was at home getting dressed and ready for work, as was my habit, 3 children, I turned the news on. I'm watching the news and I'm watching planes crash into the trade center. And my response at the time was, that's going to screw up the New York skyline. As a native New Yorker, I was more concerned about the cosmetics of what it's going to do to the skyline. And then I just said, well, got to get to work and left, did all the normalizing things. I went to work. And of course, the building I was working at was the Adobe building, which is on the flight path to San Jose Airport. And I put my ass in the chair, and within 10 minutes of being there, there was an announcement about how they were going to evacuate the building because we were in the flight path and they didn't know what was going on. Right. And I remember, complaining about it, like, grousing about having to do this because the normal thing was to be at work then. So, yeah.
But what were you going to take issue with what I was saying?
No, but I was just going to say, work never you were kind of suggesting that work was a sort of a refuge, and I was going to crap on that contention, but then I realized, yeah, probably I was not processing and chose to not process by doing what, hiding behind the baffle of the workplace. It's not like I really loved that job that much, but I just want autopilot is what took over.
Right.
So yeah.
But I think also recognizing that, we talk all the time about bad bosses and the, late stage capitalism and all the horrors. But the reality is there are a lot of people who enjoy aspects of their job. Right. And there is a real comfort in competence. Right.
Yes.
Like I like my job because I work for myself. So like that, there's there's certain financial insecurity in being your own boss, but there's a lot of joys with it too. And I choose which clients I want to work with. But even for people who work at a difficult company, being really good at your job, something you studied, that you've done, has its own satisfaction. And when you are in a circumstance where the work you have done is recognized and people hire you or promote you or just keep you employed, there's something positive about that. And there's also something positive about the bonds we build. One of I've worked at some terrible jobs, and in some of the worst jobs had the strongest connections to people. There was that sort of, in the trenches mentality. And so I think recognizing that sometimes going to work and being around people that you like or doing something that you're good at can be a salve, right? And sometimes it is not.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. These are feedback mechanisms that can either support a good day or ruin a good day, or you do the same with a bad day. But what if the not normal in your life is the workplace?
Right. And that's a different situation. I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about is, we're talking about the not normal that's happening right now politically. And it's, we're just being besieged by all of the, intense, crazy, and just, evil actions. But I was also thinking about what about when the not normal is more personal? Right. And how do you navigate that? I mean, the other thing that's not normal is normally we record this on Friday mornings, and I'm at work. I'm in work mode. Right. But we're recording now on Saturday afternoon. I was like, oh shit, I guess I better put on some lipstick. Like I'm, just in another.
Yeah, me too.
You too.
I had to put on some lipstick. Yeah.
And I was in, just sort of in a different mode. And what's interesting for me, so on Tuesday is my dead kid's birthday. And he died when he was 19.
Last Tuesday or the coming Tuesday?
This coming Tuesday. So this will air on Wednesday. So it's the 10th of February. It'll be the day before. And I realized, talking to his best friend over Christmas, that it's like, oh, it's his 40th birthday.
Ah, wow.
And there's something about that kind of, like thinking about what I was doing at 40, what, his friends who are 40 are doing. They have kids, they're married, they have, like the careers and stuff. And, it really hit me. And realizing that it's, so that's a not normal, right? Like all of the not normal of, like when he had his accident, when he died, just the, kind of ups and downs of grief. And there's a real, it takes so much energy to appear to be normal in not normal circumstances.
Well, I was hoping that you would put the period a lot sooner than you actually did, because I find it takes a lot of energy to be normal. Period. How about that?
Right, but I think, and I guess what I'm thinking about, it's so funny because I find that the advice about what to do if somebody has suffered something difficult at work, right, it's so, people are just really stupid in talking to other people who have had a tragedy or a death in the family or whatever, right? And they make it not as helpful. And so I think, people who are neurodiverse talk about masking, right? The energy it takes to show up and appear to be neurotypical in a
Yeah.
neurotypical world. And I really think it is important, whatever it is that feels off to you, whatever it is that you are carrying, to recognize that you're not just carrying the thing, right? Whether it's your reaction to what's happening in the world or a divorce or chronic pain, you're also carrying the burden of trying to show up in a way that is palatable to the people you are interacting with, certainly at work, so that you can stay employed. And that's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Yeah, I mean, for some of us, under the best of circumstances, it's exhausting, right? And I mean, often, if you think about it, your adult work life is the only one that's anchored to you associating with people that you would never associate with under any other circumstance, right? I mean, in college, you self-select your friends, you school activities, you're thrust in with other people, but you can still, there's some latitude about who you choose to spend your time with. The workplace is absolutely positively not that. And I mean, it's been super instructive my entire work life, being forced into small spaces with people who I've got nothing in common with, nor would I ever have anything in common with, and trying to function normally. We're not even talking about we're not talking about work styles. We're not talking about, it's culture issues. I think mostly primarily, where, somebody at work would say something which is so far out of my field of agreement or understanding. It's like I might as well be talking to doorknobs. It made no sense to me to try to, how was this person hired anyway? And I'm sure I probably inspired that kind of conversation in other people, but it is, considering how much time we end up spending at our jobs, it is really a marvel. I think that we do as well as we do, given, we're not murdering each other in the workplace, or not too often, though the desire might be there. But it really is kind of a modern miracle, experimental miracle, that it manages to work as it does. If you think about the jobs you've had, I would say I had genuine relationships with maybe 5% of the people that I worked with. And that's from working. I've been working since I was 14, and it's incredibly, I think, low figure, but maybe it's just reality. I don't know.
Well, and I also think that there is value in making sure that in some space in your life, you don't have to pretend that everything's okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And whether it's with family, with friends, with, community, there needs to be a space where you get to be whatever it is that you need to be. Right. Yeah. And whether it's with like-minded folks and I think there's also other solace in that. Like, one of the things that, we've done shows on all the things you're not supposed to talk about at work, and you aren't supposed to talk about politics at work. And it is useful to be able to go to a space. For me, I'm very progressive. I appreciate going to a space where I can talk about like all the things that are wrong, and ideally have some shared action, right? Because, one of the things that is, we're inundated with so much bad news that the idea of like, what can I possibly do? Right. The sort of like there's no point to anything, is to battle that, to do it in community, even if it's just like, we're going to go and have joy now, we're not going to talk about how terrible things are, or if it's like helping your community in some way, whatever it is. I think taking action is helpful. But even just like, I've noticed this before, like at work, like particularly when I was younger and I was working in circumstances where there was a lot of sexism and sexual harassment. And I also have spent most of my career in Seattle, but Seattle tends to be very kind of passive aggressive. They don't like conflict. Like, there's just a particular dynamic in the workplace here. And I'm, like second generation Italian American. Like, I'm not I'm aggressive. I'm not passive aggressive. And I would find myself like getting into spaces with friends and feel like I was taking off a weighted vest, right? The hands would be waving, the voice would go up, and just that sense of, again, recognizing it takes so much energy, but you get used to it, and really being intentional about like, I have to have a space where I can wave my hands, cuss like a sailor and say whatever it is that I need to say, because it's like I can't breathe.
Yeah. I actually, I was in a situation like that and made some mention of the doubling of the lives that we had to lead. And somebody who had been heretofore unrelated to me, really, at the table, their ears perked up, and they said, "You live a double life too?" And I was just talking about, having to wear a suit and be polite. And she started sharing with me stuff that was so far out of what I was talking about. I was happy to be privy to this, but I got very uncomfortable. I'm thankful it was not a professional setting necessarily, but it was just very strange that what doubling means to some people is not what it means to other people.
Well, are you talking, or was this other person talking about like code switching?
It's sort of. I mean, it was with a bunch of VC people at some event, and I was kind of grousing about, it was an after work event, and I was kind of grousing about, I had to fake it through an entire day of work, and now I have to do this after work thing, and I got to fake it too, this doubling of the lives. And she heard it, and right away felt like I was some kind of a partner in crime. And started talking to me about stuff that wasn't really not what I was talking about, but it was an interesting moment. She had prefigured me for some kind of sexual outlaw.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, that's not what I meant. I just meant putting on a suit and being nice to people.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So I guess, if this is something that you're experiencing, try to have some compassion for yourself, and certainly, have compassion for other people at work, because you don't know what's happening in their lives. We are caring a lot, but there's also, I think a lot about something Dan Savage said, and I'm going to not get the quote correct, but he talks about, living through AIDS, because he's like our age, right? When all of his friends were dying, he's a gay man. And that, we would bury our friends, we would protest, and then at night we would go out and we would dance. Like the idea of joy as a joy
tonic.
As resistance, joy as tonic, but also the idea of like, we're not, and Adrienne Marie Brown talks about this as well, this notion of like claiming your joy, claiming family, claiming community, claiming, whatever, binge watching TV. Like, it's okay. That's the problem with social media, right? We're inundated by news or slop or whatever so much of the time to be able to say, I've had enough. I'm done. I am going to do this thing that is comforting to me, whether it's going dancing or, cuddling with a kid or, taking your dog for a walk. I think that the notion of like, what is it that we can do, and almost like having some understanding of how much am I carrying today, and do I really need to take one more look at the news?
Yeah. I've been dealing with that because of like I said in the post connected to my Substack. So I've been trying to ignore it, and then I broke down like on Thursday and started to read the Epstein files. And I knew that it would be bad for me, but I figured, as bad as it might be for me, I wasn't stuck on that island, being used by elderly gentlemen. So I could at least, in a tribute to the victims, I could at least read through some of the stuff and enough to have a decent take for my Substack, which I now have done 2 in a row. The one that comes out on Sunday is, again, it's for 2 weeks now, has gripped my mind, and not in a way that's especially anxiety provoking. Though I'm sure were I to seek the comfort of a therapist, they would say, no, you probably need to turn it down a bit. But I would rather know than not know, and it informs my dislike of the prospect of not paying attention, right? Which is a luxury, right? The president, who I now call a presidential maniac, not interested in paying attention to it, but would rather pay attention to someone else. I think that's a weird luxury, and I'm not interested in it. So, yeah, I think again, with the workplace, the idea is to try to be as well functioning of a machine as you can be. Controlled titration. You don't have to take the full blast of your news from your news feed. We're moving slowly here. November holds some hope. But I think I think the enemy here is hopelessness. But outside of that, there's a lot of gray areas where you can live and comfortably function.
Well, and I like the idea you're talking about titrating it. Like, I think the thing is, be intentional. There is a value. There is a spiritual and moral value to bearing witness in whatever way you think is appropriate, right? And maybe it's watching the video, maybe it's reading the Epstein files. There is something to be said for bearing witness. And there is also something to be said for managing your emotional ecosystem in a way that is sustainable. Yes. And each individual needs to make that choice. And I think there also is something, when you're writing about the Epstein files, like, there is something to be said for naming what is happening, right? Like, the naming the fact that there's all of this concern about whether or not the Epstein files have been released in full and what hasn't been in there. There are many, many women who have said, I was there. This is what happened to me. These are the people that were involved. But we don't believe them because we need to get, this dead guy's files. And it's okay in an appropriate circumstance to name those things and to bear witness, but also to know when to go do something else. So, when we do certainly talk about politics, but I also feel like, I don't know, like, sometimes I go to podcasts and I want to not have to listen to things about politics. And sometimes I also feel like I don't want to listen to podcasts that don't acknowledge the fact that the country is on fire.
It is.
Because then it just seems weird. So hopefully we are almost at time. So hopefully we have balanced that line and you've gotten something from this. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas for future show topics, WTF@badbossbrief.com. WTF@badbossbrief.com. I read every single email that we get and I respond to anybody who isn't trying to sell us something. So,
which is everybody.
Yeah, which is everybody. All right. Well, good luck on the tour and thanks everybody. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your host, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Payrollo. You can check out more of their work by visiting spayrollo.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Insta. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. Stephanie will personally answer every single submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for new episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.